Hello, welcome to the Analyst Inside Cricket with me, Simon Hughes.
And me, Simon Mann, in Lahore.
Yes, and you've been at the England-Australia match today. I guess you'll be drowning your sorrows, although it's a bit late tonight, isn't it?
We're also in Pakistan, Yoz. It's a dry country, so that won't
You
be
can
happening,
drown
will
your
it?
sorrows with tea.
Can you? All right. I assumed it was with alcohol. Anyways, look, it's 11:30 at night. I think everyone's a bit wrung out after a very long day and ultimately a very dispiriting day for England. It looked as though they were, I mean, not on the verge of recording a much needed one-day victory, but they looked as though they were giving themselves a chance of doing that. But in the end, they were actually quite soundly beaten by Australia. 5 wickets with 15 balls to spare. I thought Australia played superbly. English, magnificent innings from Josh Inglis. Where's his English passport? I mean, he was born in Leeds. He lived in England till he was 14, and somehow he's escaped. And Australia have taken him on. Australia say, oh, we just have fair dinkum Australians in our team. We have Labuschagne, who's born in South Africa, Inglis, who was born in Leeds, and Aaron Hardy's in their squad as well. He was born in Bournemouth. So anyway, so it was like a quasi, half an English team or
They must
overseas
have
team being
relaxed
England today.
they must have
Yeah,
relaxed their immigration rules a bit then, or something. Because I remember,
well,
years ago, it was quite hard getting into Australia, even as a visitor. Never mind a resident.
it's the way of the world, isn't it? People move around so much more now, with jobs and things like that. People emigrate. It's the way it is. And I mean, goodness me, he played well, didn't he, Josh Inglis? What did you make of the game, Yoz? Watching on from the UK, what was your sort of overall impression of the day's
Uh,
play?
I mean, it was a great pitch. I was very impressed with the way the crowd kind of gradually filtered in. It was a fantastic atmosphere at the end, wasn't it? I mean, England Australia, so a neutral game in Lahore, and yet the crowd was almost capacity. I thought it was brilliant, actually. Yeah, I thought it was a good game. I thought it was in the balance for a long time. I thought ultimately England should have got more than 350, and we can analyse their innings. And I thought at 280 odd for five when Alex Carey was out, I thought England could still win. But then Maxwell and Josh Inglis took it away from them. I mean, unfortunately, it backed up our fears about England that they don't quite get enough. Well, I mean, one of the things we said right at the start of the sort of preview of the tournament was England have got to get enough runs to enable their bowlers to defend, a decent score. And they didn't get quite enough runs to allow what is a weakish bowling attack to defend the score. They've got to get nearly 400, I think, to allow for the sort of the liberty that their bowlers tend to give the opposition, and the fact that batting teams chasing runs on dew-laden outfields are just so good, aren't they now?
Yeah, like you, I thought England should have scored more. That's what I totally agree with that. And I think Steve Smith felt that as well. He said, we thought they were going to get 380, 400, and that would have been a tough chase. The psychology of chasing that sort of score, when you look at it, actually Australia in the end they won with 15 balls to spare, 356. You say, well, they could have got more. They could have got 380, but it's the pressure of the chase, isn't it? It's it's going that extra mile to get 380, 400. So I felt England left some out there. Yeah, I definitely thought 375 was on 380. I didn't really see them getting 400, but I mean, look, anyone who hasn't seen today's play, this was an absolutely belting pitch. It really was. So at the halfway stage, when England made 351, I think we all thought, I'm not sure that's necessarily enough. I mean, it's a competitive score, but I'm not sure it's necessarily enough. And so it proved. It wasn't just a great pitch. It was also a fantastically quick outfield as well. Okay, the boundary square of the wicket were quite big, so that can be a bit of a challenge. And actually, Livingston and Butler were both caught on the boundary, so that was an issue that England couldn't deal with. I actually thought Butler's dismissal was one of the really key points in the day. He was just starting to strike it nicely. He went for a big shot against Maxwell. And I was with Aaron Finch commentating down the BBC, and Aaron Finch said, "Well, that was the right matchup for Butler, to take him on into the leg side, and it didn't quite come off, and he was caught on the rope, and I think you sensed in his reaction that he knew that was a key moment as well, because I don't think I've seen Butler react like this before, because normally he's kind of quite inscrutable, isn't he? But he displayed that sort of inner feeling that I think anyone watching on would have thought, England supporter would have felt the same thing. He banged the turf twice. He was kind of down on the ground. He banged the turf twice in frustration that he'd hold out. And I thought that was key moment. It's an obvious thing to say. If Butler had batted through to 50 overs, then I think England, they would have scored something like 380, something like that, possibly even more. He was striking it nicely, or beginning to strike it nicely. So for me, that was a key moment in England's innings. What other key moments did you see in England's innings?
I mean, I thought Root's dismissal was a key moment, obviously. I mean, there was a superb partnership between him and Ben Duckett, which was 158 that they put on after England lost those 2 early wickets. And it was interesting that, everybody said that England need Root because he sort of anchors the innings and he plays an orthodox game, and the flamboyant players can kind of play round him, and he's the sort of the ballast in a way. And what I noticed was interesting was watching him bat against the leg spin of Adam Zampa, who is such a clever bowler and who has got Root out a number of times. And the dangerous shot against Zampa is the sweep, because he bowls such different paces and he's very straight as well. And if you miss, you're gone. And I noticed Root resisted playing the sweep shot until he got well past 50 and, was knocking it around nicely and rotating the strike. And, that was a really good foundation partnership. Excellent. And Duckett played brilliantly as well. And he got out the reverse sweep and, he played Zampa very well. But then Root just maybe seeking just to step on the gas a bit more, tried to sweep Zampa, and he was LBW. It was a bit unlucky because it was one of those that was just probably clipping the stump, and on another day the umpire would have given it not out and he would have survived the umpire's call verdict. But today it wasn't his day for that decision, and he went off chundering away. And after that, England just didn't quite get the momentum again, really. There was a bit of a surge when Butler and Duckett were together, but after that, they just never really quite kicked on. And, it was interesting that run chase is the highest run chase ever in an ICC 50-over tournament, 352, and it's Australia's second highest run chase in 50-over cricket. So it shows how, if England had got those extra 20 runs, which they should have done, then, that probably that target would have been out of reach, potentially. So Butler was out at 280 for 5 with 9 overs left. That catch on the boundary you mentioned. England should have got, 9 overs. You should get 90, shouldn't you? Should get 90, maybe even 100 off the last 9 overs with 5 or 6 wickets left. But they only got 71. And that's probably the key, the difference between the teams. Whereas obviously when Australia, it's fascinating, isn't it, actually? If you look at the Australian run chase, England 280 for 5 at the beginning of the 42nd, Australia 282 for 5 when Carey was out in the middle of the 43rd. So roughly the same period, within 3 or 4 balls, 282 Australia for 5 when Carey was out, and they won at a canter with that extraordinary explosion from Maxwell. So I think it was easier batting in the second innings. It was obviously, easier to chase runs. But, if England had that extra 25, in Australia, it would have been much tighter anyway.
Yes, it's about trying to, when you are put into bat. Now, the reason that the reason Steve Smith put England into bat was because of the dew factor, and they trained at the ground last night, and they said around about 8 o'clock the dew came down. It was quite heavy dew, and when dew's on the ground, it's quite tough for the bowling side. The ball skids on nicely for the batting side. I mean, it wasn't really obvious. I mean, by about 9 o'clock, it was quite obvious that Rashid was drying the ball. So everyone, I think, in the Australian camp thought that was a factor, and that helped them out. So that chase in the last 9 overs. Yeah, probably the dew helps you. But if you get 380, 400, then it kind of takes the dew factor out of the game, doesn't it? And that's where England just probably didn't quite get enough. I mean, it was it was a good game. England played pretty well, but they didn't win, and that's a problem for them, obviously in the competition, but also this run of defeats they're in. They obviously lost the 3 games in India, but also just generally their form in one day cricket has been really poor, and the bowling did look a bit monochrome, didn't it? You
Yeah.
on a pitch like that, you run in lots of pace, and the ball disappears. With pace as well if you don't quite get it right. I mean, it was a no margin for error pitch, and it became even more so as the day went on, as we got into really into night time. 9 o'clock, 9:30 in Lahore.
I mean, England bowled well in that first 5-6 overs, and they got the wickets of Travis Head and Steve Smith, obviously, early on. I thought Mark Wood bowled really well. I mean, the odd ball on the pads, which was put away by Short, but otherwise, he bowled a great line and got Steve Smith called at slip, and Archer got Head out, and that was looking good for England, but they didn't have anything to sort of fall back on after that. Bryden Carr's had a difficult day. I just don't think he's quite got the variety at the moment, and people are sort of picking up his length very early. I mean, Josh Inglis's pulling shots, his pull shots were absolutely extraordinary. Picking the length up so early and depositing it miles over the boundary at deep square leg. He hit some fantastic shots. I watched very carefully Jofra Archer bowling, and there was some very good analysis on the TV today by Simon Doull, explaining how his action has changed slightly. Because I've been noticing over the last few months that, or even a couple of years actually, that Jofra's angle has changed very slightly, and he's bowling more balls into the pads of the right-handers and across the left-handers, which is good for bowling against left-handers, but not so good for bowling at right-handers, because it means he's primarily, angling it into the pads. And in one-day cricket in particular, that's quite easy to score off. And it's all because his action is just slightly tilted to the offside now to protect his back. So he's sort of just falling away a touch when he lets go of the ball more than he used to. And that's angling the ball into the right-handers' pads more often. And he's also giving the left-handers a bit more width as a result. So his effectiveness has just been slightly, impacted by the injuries he's had, which is a shame. And it just means, I think, his effectiveness, he's not able to get the ball to leave the right-hander or stand up straight. And I think he probably just might have lost a couple of miles an hour pace as well. And it makes all the difference.
So here's a question for you, Yods, as a former bowler. Is that straightforward to correct? Can you correct it? Can you get it back? Or has it gone?
I mean, your body at 29 is not what it was at 26. It doesn't matter who you are, unless you haven't done much bowling until that stage. And so I think it's difficult to get it back. And I said this about his elbow injury as well. I think I was worried that he would never get his snap back in his elbow. In fact, I think he probably has. And interestingly, Mark Wood has had, 2 elbow operations, and he's still bowling at 94 miles an hour. So he's managed to recover from the surgery. But I think with your body positions and your back in particular, it's such a big, long area of your body and your spine and everything, and it becomes a little bit less flexible over time. So you don't have that sort of whippiness, that bendiness that you might have had when you're in your mid-20s or early 20s. So I think it's hard to correct. I mean, what he could do is work on actually dropping his bowling arm a bit, because it's very high. It's almost beyond the vertical, but not quite. If he just dropped it very, very slightly, he might find he could get outswing going. So I think that might help him a bit, because batsmen are lining him up a bit more than they were. He's still a very good bowler, but I think they're not as discomforted by his line, his very accurate line and awkward pace as they were.
Well, 10 overs, 1 for 82 today. Actually, England's 2 speedsters, the 2 opening bowlers, I mean, they went for a lot of runs. They went for over 150 in under 20 overs. I mean, Mark Wood, 9.3 overs, 1 for 75. I mean, one thing I felt in watching the series in India was that England didn't have the right bowlers for the conditions. It feels like we said this before, didn't we, on the podcast? I said this before on the podcast, that they look as though they've got a good bowling attack for, say, South Africa or Australia, or for England, but perhaps not for the subcontinent. I noticed that you said, well, actually they needed a bit more they needed another spin option, really, a mainline spin option. It's something actually we really not that. You have to be Sherlock Holmes to work it out, but you felt they needed it in India, and we thought perhaps the slightly different pitches in Pakistan, they might be okay, they might get away with it. But I mean, today it was absolutely unforgiving, the surface and the outfield and the batting, and perhaps the dew factor later on as well. So it was kind of like good luck. And Australia, it was the 9th highest chase in one-day international history from Australia today. So it shows you that well, how well they played, but also how benign the conditions were. You don't chase 352 that often, do you? Really, it is a tough chase, but they made it quite straightforward in the end.
And Maxwell's an extraordinary player, isn't he? I mean, English played superbly. And actually, Matthew Short was good at the top as well.
Yeah, he was.
But Maxwell he's a sort of circus act who comes in with 10 overs to go, and nobody knows where to bowl to. There was one moment where he was facing Mark Wood, and he literally stood like a baseballer, didn't he, with his left foot almost pointing towards deep mid wicket, almost sort of front on to the bowler. And then he could then adjust. I think, in fact, he backed away outside leg as well. So the bowler had full view of the stumps. And I think England tried initially to con him by making him think he was going to get a bouncer by having both mid-on and mid-on up and people back on the hook. And then Wood pitched it up, the old bluff. And Maxwell was good enough to just bunt it back over mid-on and mid-off. And then when they went short, he went across to the offside and helped it on its way. So he's a very difficult guy to bowl at, and he just provided the sort of finishing touches. Australia, they did that today without all their 3 crackerjack fast bowlers, no Mitchell Marsh. I mean, amazing, really. It must give them a huge amount of confidence to have won that game.
Yeah, you look at the two teams on paper and you think, well, England got a pretty strong side here. Australia got a second string. And Australia's second string bowling attack, well, mainly second string, Zampa's in there, of course, went for 350. And so you think, well, 350, it's not a bad score. But again, just come back to that point. I thought it was a fascinating game because while England was scoring freely, you're thinking all the time, have they got enough here? Have they got enough? Are they scoring quickly enough? But, having said that, they were 200 for 2 after 30 overs. And you think that, the old adage, wasn't it? After 30 overs, double the score. Well, double the score is 400. And they did have 8 wickets in the tank as well, with 20 overs left. So just that nagging feeling that they needed more and they should have scored more. So, that was one area. I mean, it seems quite harsh to blame the batters when they made 350, but Australia showed what was possible, but also that England attack does look. I mean, it looked at in India, it's looked at in previous one-day international, looked at times in that series against Australia that they won 3-2 in England. It does look quite hittable. They find it just hard to contain sides, but then, not easy to contain any side on that surface. And yeah, you think back to Johannesburg. When South Africa played Australia and Australia got over 400 and South Africa broke the record. I mean, it was impossible to bowl, wasn't it? I mean, it was one of those days when the bowlers had almost no chance for the bowlers. It was a bit of a lottery.
It's very difficult for the bowlers, but England do need more variety. To rely on...
So what sort of variety do they need? What are we talking about?
Well, I don't understand why Rehan Ahmed hasn't had a game or two in the lead up to this. Never mind looking at him for the next couple of games. But look, it's in a way, it's pointless saying who they need now because they haven't got them in the squad. But I think they need a left armour. Look at Australia today. They had 2 left arm seamers, didn't they, in their side? And it just gives you another option. It makes predominantly a right-handed batting order. If they've got left arm over bowlers, it's that bit harder to hit them over the leg side all the time. I bet if you looked at a wagon wheel of England, the Australian innings today, I bet 70% of the shots were over the leg side from right arm bowlers. If you bowl left arm bowls, left arm over, batters have to find other ways of scoring. And we haven't got a Sam Curran, we haven't got a Reece Topley. We said this before the tournament. I feel they're missing a left arm seamer as one thing and a second spinner.
Yeah, well, the bowling department does look deficient, and it's a pretty unforgiving tournament as well. One person we haven't said too much about so far, Ben Duckett. I mean, he makes
Yeah.
165 and he finishes on the losing side. And we spoke to him afterwards on the BBC, and he was really down. I think they score an innings or you play an innings of 165. You expect to be on the winning side, don't you? Really, it's pretty tough. You put a lot in today. We've seen Ben Duckett in the past, and Phil Salt at the top of the order, get England off to a flying start, and then perhaps get out. Not go on. And even at Bristol in that one-day international that England lost to lose the series against Australia, got 100, got out. And I remember thinking at the time, that was the day to really go on and make it count. He had lots of overs left, but he got out caught at deepish mid-off. But today he did stick at it and he did make it count. And you finish on 165, and yet you still lose by 5 wickets with 15 balls to spare. But there's something for England to hold on to today. I mean, it was a fabulous innings from him, full of variety. And also the other thing as well that was noticeable is that he did rein himself back in today, in terms of his attacking shots. And that went for England in general. Here's a stat for you today that England in the first 25 overs played 37% attacking shots, the lowest in the first half of a one-day innings in their last 50 one-day internationals, going back to July 2021. So there was a different approach from England today. This idea of, we don't have to go hard the whole time. Okay, they did lose a couple of wickets in the power play inside the circle, catches to Carey, one brilliant catch off the bat of Salt and Jamie Smith holding out to mid-on. But they did, I suppose, that Root being in there made a difference early on. So they did just sort of rein back in and actually thought, look, build the base. But then having built the base, they weren't quite able to capitalise. I mean, Duckett as well also reined himself back in today.
Yeah.
He played 31% attacking shots on the way to 50. Statistically, his least attacking half century in one-day internationals.
And he shows the value of being left-handed as well. He played superbly. He batted until the 48th over, so he batted virtually the whole innings, and scored half the runs, and without hogging the strike. So very impressive. But he's England's only left-hander in the top 7, isn't he? And I feel again that is another area that England are missing out. I mean, unlucky that Jacob Bethell wasn't fit, because he would obviously have slotted in there. But Australia had 2 key, strong left-handers in their top 6 or 7, depending on what number Alex Carey comes in. So I just think that's another area that England are slightly deficient.